natural and functional interrelationship among living organisms, and the abiotic environment of which they are basically a part. So there are different components of ecosystem. You do have three components. Mostly you do have three components. First component is a biotic component, and another component is abiotic component, and another component is basically energy component, where we'll be studying about the energy component in the function structure and functions of ecosystem. Here, what do you mean by biotic component? So within ecosystem, you do have different units or elements. So one of the element is basically your biotic element or biotic component. So biotic components are basically the living things within the ecosystem, and the presence of these biotic elements affects the composition of any ecosystem. Now, because the proportion of biotic element and abiotic element will decide the energy component also. Now, because if the biotic element will be more and the abiotic component will be less, the relationship or the interaction will be something different among in that ecosystem. Okay, so biotic elements or biotic components can be divided into two types, and those are basically your autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are basically the producers, while heterotrophs are basically the consumers. Now, producers, who are the producers? The primary producers are basically your plant communities. All the plant communities, through the process of photosynthesis only, so they use the solar energy and no provide us no, they produce food. Okay, so they are the primary producers, and those plant communities are known as autotrophs. So you do have plants, algae, other microscopic water creatures, just like phytoplanktons. So they are known as your producers. Then who are the consumers? All those, all the species which are consuming the primary product or the consumers, they will be called as heterotrophs or consumers. The consumers are basically subdivided into three, four types. You can consider that. First is your herbivores. Herbivores are basically the primary consumers. So the primary consumers are basically all those species uh, when they eat the primary producers, just like directly eating the plant products, then it will be called as herbivores. Now, just like insects, birds, some mammals, and who are carnivores? Carnivores are basically meat eaters. They are basically the secondary consumers. Then you do have tertiary consumers, and those are basically omnivores. Okay, and you do have a now we can actually subdivide that carnivore part into another part also, in which we can use predator as one of the trophic levels also. Okay, so highest predators, just like eagle, lion, they can be put into different category than other carnivores. Then you do have detritivores. Those are basically the decomposers. Those are basically all the microorganisms which decomposes uh, all the living beings, all the living organisms. Then abiotic components, all the non-living things or components of the environment or ecosystem are basically your abiotic component. So in which you do have land, climate, soil, water, energy, then air. So all these will be considered as abiotic component. And so air is basically found in atmosphere. Different types of gases, just like your nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, all types of gases and dust particles. Then you have water vapor. So all these will be considered as a abiotic component of an ecosystem. Then you do have lithospheric abiotic components, just like mountains, plateaus, plains, all the physical structures. Then you have topography, relief, and always remember, there is a difference between the physiographical features and topography. What is that? Uh, you must be aware about the geological processes, just like weathering, erosion. So the physiography includes the weathering and erosional or the geological processes within itself. While topographical features, basically all the, let's say the mountains, the plateaus. So all these will be considered as a topography. While what is relief? Relief is basically the difference between the elevations. So that will be considered as relief. Then within hydrosphere also you do have different abiotic and biotic components now, because within marine environment you will be seeing uh, the aquatic animals, the phytoplanktons. So those are basically biotic components. Now while all other things will be considered as abiotic environment. Okay, so there are different types of ecosystems. What are they? We can divide the ecosystems into two types. One is terrestrial ecosystem and another one is your aquatic ecosystem. So the terrestrial ecosystem can also be divided into the forest ecosystem, grassland ecosystem and desert ecosystem. And the aquatic ecosystem can be subdivided into freshwater ecosystem, marine and estuarine ecosystems. So let's first dive into the terrestrial ecosystem. So within terrestrial ecosystem, you do have forest ecosystem. So forest basically refers to, or the forest ecosystem basically refers to a complex collection of several types of biotic communities. So within forest, what you basically observe? Now, what you basically find? Those are basically, the forests are basically consist of, abiotic component and biotic component. You do have flora and fauna communities, and you do have different types of terrain or topographical features. Then you do have also soil, forest soils are basically, forest and peaty soils are basically found in mountainous region. So within forest ecosystem, these are basically the elements of the forest ecosystem. So the forest ecosystem can be categorized into coniferous forest, temperate forest, and tropical forest. And if you have studied about the types of forest, now even in India geography also there are different types of forests that you might have studied. Coniferous forests are basically all those forests which are found in cold regions, and where the plants will be uh, you know long. Okay, the branches, sorry, the stem of the plants will be very long, and these are basically observed in the tundra regions are basically very cold regions, and those can be observed in North America, Eurasia, then Canada, Sweden, Finland, Siberia. So all these coniferous forests are very much predominant in these regions. Now also in greater heights of Himalayan mountains also, you will be seeing different characteristics of coniferous forests. Now, because different species of coniferous forests are basically found in the higher altitudes of different mountains. Now, because that basically provides them favorable or suitable climatic conditions so that they can adapt to those conditions. Then your temperate forest ecosystems. So this can be divided into two types. One is your temperate evergreen forest and temperate deciduous forest. Now, although the tropical within tropical forests also you will be seeing evergreen and deciduous forests. So do the temperate forests do have those kind of forests also. So temperate forests. The temperate region will be having different climatic condition as compared to the tundra climatic condition. Now, because these temperate forests or these temperate regions do have lesser temperature conditions as compared to the tundra region. Now, because the tundra regions basically are very much closer to the polar regions. Okay, so that is why the tundra regions do have different climatic conditions, and the temperature basically varies from the temperate regions towards the tundra region. So here in temperate evergreen forests, these do have variations in climatic conditions, variations in temperature. So they do have warm and dry summers. They do have cold and moist winters. And now just think about the Mediterranean climate. Now, because the Mediterranean climate is a very dynamic climate, and if you have studied about the agriculture of the globe or agriculture of the earth, then you can remember that the Mediterranean region is very fertile, and a lot of fruits, okay, are cultivated in those regions. Okay, so this is this Mediterranean farming is also important. Okay, and what are the different types of animals? Those are basically observed in these kind of temperate evergreen forests. You do have mules, deers, rabbits, wood rats, chipmunks, lizards. So these are common creatures of the temperate evergreen forest. Then it basically receives high amount of precipitation, not throughout the year, but mostly during the winter months, the moist winter months. Now, the temperate regions mostly receives rainfall or precipitation mostly during this time. Now, why? Because of different cyclonic disturbances. And while the tropical regions mostly receive rainfall or precipitation during the summer, moist summer months. So here the temperate deciduous forests are well developed in the moderate temperature regions, and these deciduous forests, definitely the deciduous forests will be having a broad-leaf deciduous trees. Now, because the evergreen forest, the temperate evergreen forests will be receiving ample amount of precipitation. That is why the leaves will be different. And here the temperate deciduous forests uh, do have broad-leaf deciduous trees. Now, this can be found in North America, Europe, Eastern Asia, Japan, mostly during the cold winter months. Okay, and what are the different types of plant species? Those are basically found here. You do have fine maple trees, then beech, oak, hickory, basswood, chestnut trees. So all these kind of species are basically found here. And animal creatures, basically you'll be seeing deer, bears, squirrels, gray foxes, wild turkey. So these are important animals which are observed in these regions. Then you do have tropical forest ecosystem. So tropical forest ecosystems can be subdivided into, have you studied about biomes? Biomes are, you do have different, biomes do cover a very large geographical extent. Okay. So when it covers a very large geographical extent, it do have homogeneous climatic condition. Maybe you will be seeing homogeneous animal communities and homogeneous vegetation communities also. So here in tropical regions, you'll be seeing mostly the evergreen forests, tropical evergreen forests and deciduous forests. So these are the primary types of biomes. Those are basically observed in tropical region. And the deciduous forest basically receives rainfall. You may not be seeing rainfall throughout the year in tropical region. So the evergreen forests are mostly nearby the equatorial region, which areas basically receives a high amount of precipitation throughout the year. And these deciduous forests are characterized by different plant communities and animal communities. Now, why? Now, because now you can think about the India. And if you are living in Odisha, all the Eastern Ghat mountains are basically deciduous forests. Now, few of them are the dry deciduous forests, and few of them are moist deciduous forests. So, definitely, all the forest, those basically receives annual rainfall of around more than 400 millimeter in monsoon period, I believe. Those are basically considered as most deciduous forests as compared to all those regions which are dry. Now, because sometimes because of orographic rainfall, few of the mountains or the small hilly regions, they remain dry. So that is why those kind of, the dry deciduous forests are basically seen in those regions. What are the important animal communities? You may see chameleons, jungle cats, squirrels, monkeys, sloths. So all these are common animals of this forest ecosystem, the tropical forest ecosystem. Then grassland ecosystem. There are important grasslands of the world. I think you should be knowing about that also. So you do have steppes, savannas, vales, then pampas, and downs of South Africa. Sorry, vales of South Africa, downs of Australia, steppes of Eurasia, okay, savanna of Africa. Then you have pampas. Then so those grasslands are basically found in the Argentina region of South America. So, what are the fundamental characteristics of these kind of grasslands? So, they do receive very less rainfall. Okay, and typical grasslands are mostly plants, and you will be seeing, the height of the grasses depend upon the soil's quality. Now, because sometimes the height of the grasses of steppe grassland, exceeds more than 5 meters to 10 meters also. So it depends upon the climatic condition. It depends upon the soil's fertility, the nature of the fertility. So and it actually these grasslands also do provide the that region some of the resources. Now, just like the steppe region of America and the Eurasian part, the Eurasian region are extensively cultivated. Okay, then desert ecosystem. So deserts basically uh, okay. Sorry for the inconvenience. Okay, so all the desert ecosystems are characterized by a different types of climatic activities, different types of climate. Okay, now because the desertic regions uh, do have extreme climates. Either you will be seeing cold desert, or you will be seeing warm desert or hot deserts. So in hot deserts, so the temperature uh, in the daytime basically exceeds more than 40 degrees Celsius, even more than 45 degrees Celsius also. And the cold deserts and During night times, actually temperature drops very quickly, because of the presence of pores in the sands. The sands do have a property that they can actually quickly lose the heat they have absorbed. So that is why most of the hot deserts, they basically experience very low temperatures during night times also. So the deserts in the temperate regions are basically found in the rain shadow regions. So rain shadow regions are actually is basically that region where you don't get rainfall. No, that region basically don't get rainfall because of the topographical barrier. And if you do understand the orographic rainfall, you should be recalling about the. Then you do have aquatic ecosystem. So within aquatic ecosystem, you do have freshwater ecosystem, marine ecosystem, and estuarine ecosystem. So within freshwater ecosystem, we have lakes, ponds. These are basically freshwater lakes, ponds. Then you have rivers, and all the ecosystems. Those are basically found in these. Okay, so what are the different? You will be seeing, aquatic animals, aquatic plants. Those are basically found in these regions. Now, the lacustrine ecosystem. Those are basically the lake ecosystems. They do have uh, different plant communities, and you will be seeing different animal communities are also seen in these lakes. So altogether, they make the ecosystem of that lake. And here are few lakes, just like Lake Baikal. Okay, Baikal is the deepest lake of the world, and just like the Superior Lake, there are five Great Lakes of the North America and the Canada, and Superior is one of them, and Superior Lake is the largest freshwater lake of the world. Okay, so other great five lakes are basically you do have Ontario, Lake Superior. I don't remember other names. So, what are the different species that you basically find in these aquatic ecosystems? You do have blue green algae, then diatoms, and no benthic flowering plants. So all these types of species are basically seen in aquatic ecosystem. Freshwater. Then you do have marine ecosystem. Marine ecosystems are basically characterized by saline water, and here all the seas and oceans, the ecosystem of the seas and oceans. do vary from region to region based on the salinity of the ocean water, based on the climate condition also. Now, because the tropical region will be having somewhat different ecosystem as compared to the temperate seas or oceans. So those regions will be having a different ecosystems. So marine habitats actually encompasses 70% of the Earth's surface. The majority of the salt is basically sodium chloride, as we know. And other than that, you do have potassium, magnesium salts. And furthermore, light is basically a limiting factor in the ocean, so which has a substantial impact on the organic production and marine life dispersal. So unlike land and the terrestrial ecosystem, temperature and salinity remains essentially constant in the seas. Life in water is not exceptionally plentiful, but the diversity of species is extremely high. And because as we have discussed, the species communities of the tropical region will be different from that of the temperate region. Now, because few of the species will survive mostly in certain temperature conditions, just like you can take the case of coral reefs. Okay, so the corals they do need a certain range of temperature within which they can flourish, they can survive. Or if they cannot survive in a very low temperatures, so these kind of ecosystem or marine ecosystems also depend upon the climate of that place and other factors. Estuarine ecosystem, what do you mean by estuarine ecosystem? Estuarine ecosystems actually is a mixture of both freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. Now, because the estuary, uh, from the word estuary, we do get this word, the estuarine ecosystem. Now, because the estuarine ecosystem will be having both the characteristics of freshwater and both the freshwater and marine ecosystems. So it is basically a transitional zone between the oceans and the freshwater ecosystems. Why? And because when rivers basically enter to the sea, they do form delta, or they will be forming the estuaries. And estuaries do have uh, some sort of ecosystems now, because some of the estuaries are very large, so that is why they do develop the ecosystem, and they do have both the characteristics of the marine and aquatic ecosystems. Here it has been given a few examples of the estuaries has been given, and even in Odisha also you do have a Chilika Lake. Now, because the Chilika Lake do have its own ecosystem, and you'll be seeing some species, plant communities and animal communities are also seen in that region. Estuaries are prominent in the Kerala coast, the even the Andhra and Tamil Nadu coast also do have some estuaries. And in Kerala, you'll be seeing the backwaters, also known as Kayal. Okay, uh, so all these are basically characterized by the estuarine ecosystems. Now, because they do have a mixture of both the ecosystems. Human ecology. So, human ecology, I mean, we have understood the concept of ecology, and as human is playing a major role, a very critical role in studying the ecology. This concept of human ecology actually focuses mostly on the human part. Now, why? Now, because humans are basically no very important in while studying about the ecology. Now, because Humans are the one, they are interacting dynamically with its environment, with the other non-living, no, non-living things and other creatures or other organisms. So that is why we are studying about the human ecology. Okay, so it has been coined by H. Burroughs. He was an American geographer. So what he said was, actually he stated that geography is the science of human ecology. Now, geography will aim to make clear the relationships existing between the natural environment and the distribution and activities of man. So, what McKinsey has told, no, he stated that it deals with the spatial aspect of the symbiotic relations of human beings and human institutions. Symbiotic means what? Symbiotic is basically the interrelationship. Okay, so the interconnectedness, that is basically the symbiotic relationship. Now, because the human beings and human institutions are interconnected, so McKinsey has defined, in a different way as compared to H. Burroughs. Structure and functioning of ecosystem. So, what is the structure and function? What are the different structures and functions of ecosystem? First, let's understand about the ecological communities. So, what do you mean by ecological communities? Ecological communities are basically what? They are a group of species. Group of species. Those are basically living uh, within that ecosystem are basically the ecological communities. So, a collection of plant and animal that have similar needs for habitat and may include species that interact with one another or depend on the same environmental process. So, based on the existing environmental condition, a community may occur or sustain in an area. Now, because in further parts or further sections, we will be studying about the environmental adaptation. So, here in the environmental adaptation actually plays an important role. Now, here in ecological communities, now they are basically homogeneous in nature. Ecological communities, and if I'll be telling you about the plant communities of the dry deciduous forest, the plant communities of the moist deciduous forest. So there is some sort of differences. Why? Now, because they are being characterized by different types of rainfall. So when they are characterized by different types of rainfall, the plant communities also vary within the dry deciduous forest and the moist deciduous forest. But a simpler example will be, the evergreen forest and the deciduous forest. So the evergreen forest actually receives ample amount of rainfall throughout the year because of the convection activity nearby the equatorial region. So that is why the plant communities are very different. The plant species are very different from that of the deciduous forest, and they are homogeneous. Now, because the deciduous forests, the plant communities of the deciduous forest do have homogeneous plant communities, and the evergreen forest, within that evergreen forest also, you will be seeing homogeneous communities. So they are characterized by homogeneous communities. So those we can say actually the ecological communities. Hello? Yes, anybody is saying something? Okay. So within ecological communities, you do have a different hierarchy. Okay. So That is basically a framework of energy transfer or nutrient flow. That is a hierarchical framework, and though that is basically known as your trophic level. The trophic levels can be subdivided into five, four trophic levels, or five if you will be including the decomposers. Then you will be having five trophic levels. So in the first trophic level, those are basically occupied by the producers, the plant communities, the phytoplanktons, the grasses, the trees. So all these are included under the producers. Those are included in the first trophic level. Those are also known as your autotrophs. And within the second trophic level, it is basically consisting of the primary consumers. Primary consumers, who are the primary consumers? Primary consumers are basically the herbivores uh, who eat basically the plant products or grass, just like grasshoppers, insects, grazing animals, cows. All these are basically the primary consumers. Then you do have secondary consumers in the third trophic level, and these are basically the carnivores. And examples are birds, frogs, fishes, wolf, etc. are basically the secondary consumer. Who are the tertiary consumers? Tertiary consumers can be the omnivores or can be the highest or top level carnivores, just like lions, eagles, and other predator animals. Then at the last, you are having the decomposers. Decomposers, they include different microorganisms, just like bacteria, fungi. Then so what they basically do basically they do the breakdown of organic matter from dead plants or animals. And while breaking down the organic matter, they release heat also. Okay, so here is a table that basically shows the characteristics, category, and examples. Within first topic level, you do have producer. Then second topic level, you do have a primary consumer. Within third topic level, you do have secondary consumer. Fourth topic level, you do have the tertiary consumers. And at the last topic level is basically occupied by the decomposers. So here are the examples. You can go through the examples also. Then composition and the structure of the ecosystems. So let's first understand about the food chain and food web. What is food chain? Food chain is basically a systematic feeding order where one organism eats another organism, which is further consumed by another creature. So that is basically a food chain. Now let's suppose take the example of a terrestrial ecosystem where grasshoppers are basically eaten by, sorry, the grass are basically eaten by the grasshoppers. Then grasshoppers are basically eaten by the birds. Then birds are eaten by let's say snakes, and the snakes are eaten by eagle or anything. And then at the end, when eagle dies, he will be saying, the decomposers, they will be doing their activity. So this is a simple food chain, and this is very systematic in nature. Now, because the first primary, sorry, the producers are basically the grasses. Uh, they are the autotrophs. Those are basically eaten by the primary consumers. Let's say the grasshopper, and then they are eaten by the secondary consumers. Then the predators. Then the decomposers. Lastly, the decomposers. They are doing their activity, and uh, this is your food chain. And what is food web? Food web is basically a complex food chain. Now, when the food chain is basically complicated, then we can consider that as a food web. Why a food web? Now, because sometimes the food chain is not systematic. It is not arranged in systematic trophic levels. Now, sometimes the omnivores, they do consume the autotrophs. Now, because sometimes few of the animal species, they do eat plant products directly. Even they can eat the primary consumers also, because they are meat eaters also. So in that case, we cannot simply consider that as a food chain now, because it is much more interconnected waves. So that is why it is much more complex in nature. So when the food chain is complex, it is basically known as the food web. So here is an example of, yeah, so I have given this example of food chain of grassland ecosystem. Then here you do have food chain of forest ecosystem where trees and plants, they are eaten by deers. Then deers are basically eaten by wolf. So wolves are basically the secondary consumers. Then tertiary consumers, just like lion, so they do eat wolves. And lastly, the decomposers, they do their activity at the end when, let's say, the lion dies, and after that they break down the organic matter. So here is an example of food wave. Here you can see that the stag can directly eat the grass, and when it is very much interconnected, sorry, interlinked, or when it is complex, the food chain is complex and it is not following the tropic levels. Okay, so the fast tropic level, from the fast tropic level, then there will be second tropic level, then there will be third tropic level. So it is not following that. When it is not following that, then we can simply say that this is a food wave. Okay, so let's have a break of 5 minutes, then we'll continue. Okay, so let's continue further. So within the functions of ecosystem, you do have energy flow, and to understand the energy flow, you need to understand that the hierarchical uh, framework. Okay, so of ecosystem, that is basically the trophic levels. Now, energy to understand the energy flow within ecosystem, you need to understand the laws of the thermodynamics. There are basically two laws. One is your energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. So that is one. And another thing is basically the energy uh, will be converted from one medium to another, from one form to another. So that is another law. So the laws of the thermodynamic will characterize these this energy flow within any ecosystem. So so what is that energy? Well, energy can be your heat energy. Now let's suppose the heat is basically consumed by, or let's say absorbed by, the autotrophs. Those are basically the primary producers. So the primary producers then being eaten by the primary consumers, and when the primary consumers they do eat the plant products, they basically consume, or they basically take some sort of energy from that plant product. So within that, a lot of no a lot of energy is basically lost to the atmosphere, or to, let's say, the space, in the form of heat. So here, let's try to understand this energy pyramid in an ecosystem. The pyramid is basically energy pyramid is basically introduced by the CE Elton in 1927, and you'll be seeing here, 90% of the energy is lost at each trophic level. I mean, from the producer level. So producers are basically the first trophic level. So from first trophic level, when energy is basically being transferred to the second trophic level, there is a loss of 90% of energy. Okay, so the heat energy is basically lost. So now let's suppose the grasshoppers are consuming the grasses, then the 90% of the energy are basically lost. I mean, they do consume 10% of the energy from the producers. So when we are getting into, or going into the secondary consumer level, you will be having only one unit, or only 1% of the energy. Okay, so likewise, in the tertiary consumers level, you will be having 0.1%, and at the apex predator level, they will be having 0.01% of energy, heat energy, basically. Okay, so what are the other functions of ecosystem? You do have, first is your energy flow. So energy flows through through food chains and food webs. Now, because there is interrelationship between different trophic levels. So and those are well discussed through the concepts like the food webs and food chain. Now, because the energy is basically transferred within the ecosystem through the food chain and food web. Then what are the other functions? You do have different biogeochemical cycles. So those are your carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, oxygen cycle, hydrological cycle, then sulfur cycle. So all these kind of cycles are basically influenced, or are basically functioned or governed by the ecosystem. So this is an essential function of the ecosystem. Why? Now, what is carbon cycle? So what happens in carbon cycle? I think this kind of biogeochemical cycles, I believe you do understand it better. So first, what happens? The carbon is basically taken by the plant communities through the process of photosynthesis, and and when we are consuming the plant products, we are basically taking the carbon. Yes or no? So it becomes organic organic carbon, and that organic carbon, when you basically, let's say you some species die, then what will happen? So the carbon will be released. Yes or no? So the carbon will be released. Let's say you are burning fossil fuels, and all the fossil fuels are basically created through this process only. The fossil fuels are nothing but the carbons. So no, now when different industries they do use these fossil fuels, I mean the combustion of fossil fuels, that basically releases the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So in which what happens again, the carbon is released back to the atmosphere, and it follows a cyclic pattern. And in this way, the ecosystems basically what the ecosystems they do, they do govern this kind of biogeochemical cycle. Now, if sorry, so then come to the nitrogen cycle. So within nitrogen cycle, the atmospheric nitrogen is basically fixed by the different microorganisms. I believe. Just a minute. Okay, so what happens in first? So basically, through the process of uh, nitrification, ammonia gets converted into nitrates, and the denitrifying. Sorry, we have gone so much fast. You need to understand that the nitrogen is basically taken from the atmosphere through, let's say, the lightning, or take the example of lightning. So within lightning, what happens? The nitrogen is fixed into the soil, and other processes like the nitrogen fixation. There are different types of nitrogen fixing bacteria. They do convert the nitrogen into ammonia, and they
ସାର୍
that
କାର୍ବନ
basically is
ସାଇକେଲରେ ଟିକେ
accessible.
ଡାଉଟ୍ ଅଛି। ସାର୍
ହଁ
କାର୍ବନ
ପଚାର।
ସାଇକେଲରେ ଟିକେ ଡାଉଟ୍ ଅଛି, ମାନେ ଫାଷ୍ଟ ପ୍ରଡ୍ୟୁସରରୁ କନଜ୍ୟୁମର ଆସିଲା ତାପରେ
कार्बन साइकिल रे प्रोड्यूसर कंज्यूमर साଙ୍ଗरे किछि नाही। Carbon cycle, you just forget about the trophic levels here. You know, this is another function of the ecosystem. Carbon cycle रे कोन एटा गोटे basically गोटे cyclic process. So within that cyclic process, what happens? The atmospheric carbon is basically taken by the, let's say, the plant communities through the process of photosynthesis. They are consuming carbon. ଏତିକି ବୁଝା ପଡୁଛି?
Yes, sir.
Then okay, so that organic carbon, you know, the fossil fuels ମାନେ ବୁଝୁଛନ୍ତି ଯେମିତି କି petroleum, coal, ଏଟା କେମିତି ଆସୁଛି? Dead organisms ମାନେ plant ଧରା ଯୋଉ ବହୁତ ଦିନ ହେଲାଣି dead ହେଇକି decompose ହେଇକି ସେଟା basically କଣ ହଉଛି? fossil fuel ସେଟା ହିଁ ହଉଛି ନା। ତ ସେଇଟା ହେଇ ସାରିଲା ପରେ ଆମେ ସେଇ fossil fuels ଟାକୁ ୟୁଜ କରୁଛନ୍ତି, ମୋଷ୍ଟଲି ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଜ ହିଁ ୟୁଜ କରୁଛି ସେଟା। ତ ସେଇଟା ଯେତେବେଳେ ଇଣ୍ଡଷ୍ଟ୍ରିଜ ୟୁଜ କରୁଛି, ତାପରେ ଆମେ ଯେତେବେଳେ ଫସଲ ଫ୍ୟୁଲ ୟୁଜ କରୁଛନ୍ତି ସେତେବେଳେ କଣ ହଉଛି? କାର୍ବନ ଡାଇଅକ୍ସାଇଡ atmosphere को पड़े जाऊँची. So in that way, what happens? The carbon is basically got back into the atmosphere again. So this is basically a cyclic process. And
Yes,
again,
sir.
the photosynthesis process. Okay, again the photosynthesis process will go on. So this is basically a cyclic process. So that is what I have told. Or any other doubt? Now, don't get confused about these kind of biogeochemical cycles with the different trophic levels. Now, the trophic levels are different. Trophic levels are basically a hierarchical framework of the energy flow through food chain. Just like I have told you about the food chain. So within food chain, what happens? The primary producers are basically eaten by the primary consumers, then secondary consumers, then so on till the decomposers. And if there is a complex food chain, then we can simply consider that as the food web. Okay, so this is another function of ecosystem, these biogeochemical cycles. Now, because these are basically regulated by or functioned by the ecosystem. So, without ecosystem, how carbon cycle gonna take place? Without ecosystem, how nitrogen cycle gonna take place? So that is what I am telling. Okay, so now let's suppose will not. Now, what is ecosystem? Ecosystem is basically the interaction between the living and non-living beings within themselves and with the environment. So that is the total ecosystem. So without ecosystem, the nitrogen cycle cannot be possible. That is what I am telling. Okay. So
Yes,
within
sir.
nitrogen cycle, okay, within nitrogen cycle, first what happens? The nitrogen is basically fixed into the soil, and then it will be available for the plants. Now once the nitrogen is available for the plant, they will be consuming it. Now because you must be knowing that the legumes, now all the high protein rich foods basically is characterized by the nitrogen only, ammonia. So ammonia is basically a product of nitrogen. So these nitrogen, just think about uh, the plant products. Now because the plants, they do get nitrogen from the soil. Now because the fixed nitrogen will be available for consumption for the primary producers. So once they consume it, then again it comes to the food chain. Okay, it comes into the food chain. So once it comes into the food chain, what happens? Then there are different processes. Okay, so first one is nitrogen fixation, then assimilation. What do you mean by assimilation? Assimilation is basically the nitrogen is assimilated within other plants. Ammonification, then nitrification, and then denitrification. These are different processes of nitrogen cycle. So through assimilation, what happens? The plant takes up nitrogen compounds from the soil. That is assimilation. Now the nitrogen gets assimilated in within the plant communities. Then how consumers, they do get nitrogen? So through the process of, yes, through the nitrification, ammonia is basically converted into nitrates or nitrates. And what happens then? We are basically consuming. Okay, we are basically consuming nitrogen. Then the last process is basically the denitrification. Denitrification is possible because of the denitrifying bacteria. Okay, so there are different bacteria. So what happens now? Let's suppose that plant, the death of the plant, or maybe few leaves will fall down on the earth. So what will happen? That will be decomposed. So once it will be decomposed, what will happen to that nitrogen that has been assimilated by that plant? Now because all the leaves will be having nitrogen within it. Now, because the plant has consumed nitrogen from the soil, so once that leaf will fall on the ground, then it will be decomposed. So the denitrifying bacteria, what they will do, they will release the nitrogen into the atmosphere again. So this cycle will go on again. So within phosphorus cycle, you do have different process, just like No, the rock phosphates, no, phosphorus is basically found in the rocks. Then rocks are why? Now, because through the process of weathering, soils are there are different process of weathering. I think you must be knowing weathering is one of them. Now, because weathering is very important for the soil formation. Now, the parent rock. Do you understand the parent rock? Parent rock is basically the rock which is present within that region. Now, because if the parent rock is hard, the formation of soil will take place a very long time. Okay, it will take a very long period of time. Now, if the parent rock is, let's say, sedimentary rock, so it can simply no the soil formation process will take place no lesser period of time as compared to, let's say, hard rocks. So these rocks basically do have some properties, and rocks do contain the phosphates. So that gets into the soil now because the parent rocks are basically uh, they are basically developing the soil of that region. So once soil gets the phosphate, the it is again taken by the phosphate is basically taken by the plants. Then the plants, if some animals are eating the plants, then the phosphate basically um, transfers into the animals. Then animals to the living organisms, then to dead plants or organisms. Then again the phosphate is basically released. Okay, again the phosphate is basically released to the soil or run off to the water bodies if that plant or dead plants or dead organisms fall into, let's say, some water sources. Then what will happen, that phosphate will be released to the water bodies. So the phosphorus will again be stored in those water bodies. So this is basically a cyclic process again, because it is basically coming from the rocks. Then soil basically do have phosphates. Plants are consuming the phosphate. Then animals are also consuming the phosphate. In this way, this is basically a cyclic process. So within sulfur cycle also you do have two processes, mostly the sulfate and the sulfide. So uh, sulfur is basically produced through different oxidation states, and they do have important functions in this the geological and biological process. It basically involves weathering, assimilation, and decomposition. Then where from we are getting the sulfur? Sulfur from, let's say, the mineralization process, from minerals, from from inorganic forms, just like hydrogen sulfide. Okay, so these are the sources of the sulfur. So these sources, from these sources, basically it is assimilated by plants through soil. Okay, so soils do get sulfur from different minerals and other inorganic forms, just like I have told about the hydrogen sulfide and other sulfide minerals. So from that only soil do get the sulfur. Then it is transferred into, or maybe decomposed, and get released back to the soil. So soil to plant, then plant to soil. So this is the cycle of the sulfur. Then hydrological cycle. So this is pretty easy. I believe you everybody knows about it. So here is uh, here is a diagram about the water cycle. So first, what happens? The evaporation occurs, then condensation occurs. What happens through evaporation? So moistures are basically taken by uh, Then condensation occurs when you do have 100% saturation. Now, once you do have 100% humidity, so the air will be saturated and the condensation will occur, then the precipitation will occur. So once precipitation will occur, then what will happen? Uh, Through evaporation, you may have evapotranspiration also. So evaporation from the plant leaves or from the plant, that is basically termed as evapotranspiration. And after precipitation, though the rain, the precipitation, what happens? That water or that moisture is again got back to the its sources. So this is basically a cyclic process that is basically characterized by the sun. Then oxygen cycle also. So there are different sources of oxygen. Oxygen is available in atmosphere, and through photosynthesis also it uh, releases oxygen into the atmosphere. So we, through the process of respiration, we are inhaling oxygen and releasing the carbon dioxide. And now, what are the other uses? Just like in the process of combustion, oxygen is basically consumed, and that also basically releases the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And basically, what happens when some plants or animals they die, the decomposers they basically again releases the oxygen into the atmosphere. These are basically same things. Okay, and what is different within them is basically the processes. You know, within nitrogen cycle, you do have different processes. You know, the names are different, but the no, the framework is basically same. They are cyclic in nature, and just think about the biotic components, or just think about the tropic levels. If no decomposers will be present, then what will happen? You know, this cyclic nature of these biogeochemical cycles will not be possible. So this is why we are considering these cycles are a part of, you know, ecosystem services or ecosystem functions. Then ecological succession. So ecological succession is basically a process through which, you know, the community of organisms change or evolves over a period of time. So that basically leads to a changing ecosystem. Now just think about uh, now what happens when when a tsunami occurs in any coastal region. So that will basically wipe out the plant and animal communities of that region mostly. So then what will happen after that? After that also, you know, few of the plant communities they will evolve, you know. Then again what will happen? The vegetation community will flourish, then the animal community will also flourish. So from smaller form to a larger form, so that is basically succession or ecological succession. I mean, just think about the earth. How now why we are or our planet is basically considered as a blue planet. Now why we do have green plants, and why we do have life in our planet? Why that is basically possible? Because of this ecological succession. You know, in a period of time, you know, the water, now from which, you know, the blue green algae could have been produced or the lichens could have been produced, and then you get some sort of, let's say, you know, the green plants, then larger trees, and out of which few microorganisms will develop. Then again, those from the microorganisms few animals might have been developed. Then again, this is basically the ecological succession. Okay, So the ecological succession can be divided into two types. That is basically the primary succession and the secondary succession. So primary succession is basically now when the barren land, no, without existing soil condition, when it will be having some sort of vegetation communities or animal species communities, then it is basically the primary succession. Now because it is not having right now, it is not having any existing soils. Okay, so just primary succession basically starts with the coming up of species of adaptable organisms such as lichens. So through times, now just like now, this is basically a case of volcanic island. Think about a volcanic island that has been newly formed. Okay, so the volcanic activity occurred in mid oceanic regions, and a new island has been formed in the mid ocean. Okay, so what will happen first? First, it will be coming up with species of adaptable organisms such as lichens. So lichen can adapt to that environment. Through time, what will happen? Such species help in breaking down of rocks, leading to soil formation process. Now, when lichens will break down the rocks, that will basically lead to the formation of soil. Now, because now weathering activity may take place, and these lichens will also help in speeding of the weathering activity. So, in a way, what will happen? The soil will be formed. So over a period of time, what will happen? The organic matter accumulation and decomposition will contribute to the growth of grasses and other vegetation communities. So during the intermediate stage, what will happen? The soil formation will progress. That will basically lead to the development of shrubs, trees. That okay. And these species are complex and larger than the initially colonized species. Now, when the ecological condition of that region will be stable, that means there will be few dominant plant species and few dominant animal species. Those species are known as actually the climax community. Which are the climax community? Because they are living at the equilibrium. Okay, they are living at the utmost balance. So those will be called as the climax community. Now, just like all the dominant species, now let's take the example of the evergreen forest. Now, let's say the oak trees are found in evergreen forest. Oak trees, okay, although oak trees are not found, maybe some sort of oak trees are found. So then what happens? Now, oak is a climax community of the evergreen forest. So that is what I am trying to say. The climax community is the the last community. They are the dominant species. All kind of, let's say, all kind of vegetation species which are dominating that region will be considered as the climax community. Why? Now because they have adapted to the environmental condition, the climate, the soil, and the region. So all kind of factors are being adapted by that community, the vegetation community or the animal community. So that is why they can survive or flourish in that region or in that ecosystem. So those communities are basically known as the climax communities. Now let's suppose the polar bears. They are the climax communities of the tundra region or the polar ice caps or the polar region. Now they cannot survive in tropical regions. Now because the tropical regions are basically hot and humid. So that is why they cannot simply survive here. So in the polar regions, in the tundra regions and temperate, some sort of temperate regions, you will be seeing polar bears as one of the climax communities. Okay. Then what is secondary succession? So in primary succession, what happens? Primary succession, a newly formed, uh, ecological, newly formed environment or newly formed ecosystems are basically seen. Now, while in secondary succession, basically you will be having the soil. Now I have given you the example of tsunami. Now if tsunami occurs, it may not destroy the whole soil. Okay, so the primary succession takes a plenty period of time, while the secondary succession may take few years. Okay, the same thing will occur. Now, I have given you the example of the tsunami, so that can be considered as the secondary ecological succession. Okay, so adaptation of plants and animals. Adaptation is basically how they are adapting to that environmental condition. So, you must be knowing the structural. So there are different types of adaptations that we'll be discussing here. So first is your structural adaptation. Structural adaptation means what? Now when they need to change the structure of their body, shapes, color, or anything to adapt to that climatic condition, or maybe to that region, then we are basically calling that as structural adaptation. Now, you must be knowing about the chameleons. So chameleons are very good examples. So they can hide in different plants, and they can change their body colors. So that is
Sir,
basically
butterfly भी होगा, butterfly भी होगा, मैंने
butterfly
insects
भी
भी होगा
होगा.
butterfly.
So basically what happens? So ସେମାନେ ତାଙ୍କର body color ବା shape ସେମାନେ change କରିପାରିବେ ହେଲା, ତ ସେଇଟା structural, ସେମାନେ adapt କରୁଛନ୍ତି ସେ environment conditions କୁ, so that let's say some predators they may not find that କି ହଁ ସେଠି ଅଛି may be କିଛି. The butterflies be okay, spiders, so they do have they can actually structurally adapt to certain environmental conditions. Then what do you mean by physiological adaptation? Physiological adaptation is basically when they regulate their body temperatures. Those are basically in extreme conditions. It may help them in tolerating very high temperatures, hibernation, or insulation. So those are basically physiological adaptations. Just like here mammals, okay, mammals, birds, they can regulate their inner body temperatures. Some species have developed their desiccation resistance with adaptation to reduce water loss. You may have some. Okay, think about an example of xerophyte. Do you understand xerophyte? Xerophytes can actually survive in less water. Okay, so that is basically a physiological adaptation. Now, because they can survive when having less water also. So that is a physiological adaptation, and that is somewhat different from the structural adaptation. And what are the behavioral adaptations? Behavioral adaptations basically you do have migration, animal migration. So that is behavioral adaptation. Why? Now because to adapt to that environmental conditions. Now some birds they cannot tolerate high temperature conditions. So what will happen? So definitely they will be migrating towards the polar region, while some birds they cannot tolerate extreme cold temperature. Then what will happen? They will migrate to the tropical regions. So this is basically a behavioral adaptation. Okay, now just like Chilica basically receives Siberian birds. Siberian birds they basically migrate to these regions. And if you have studied about the biomes, you must be knowing that the migratory birds they migrate from the boreal forests or the tundra forest towards the temperate grasslands or the temperate forests. Okay, and during summer, then what will happen? During summer months, they will again migrate to their original places. During winter months, mostly they do migrate towards the temperate regions now, because they do have favorable climatic conditions. Those are basically behavioral adaptation. Then reproductive adaptations. So few plants and animals, they do adapt to certain environmental conditions for optimizing their chances of reproduction. Okay, so that is basically reproductive adaptations. Now, because you can take the example of the migratory birds or migratory animals of the polar regions. So they do have different seasons for reproduction. So that is basically reproductive adaptation. Nutritional adaptation basically few species, animal species or plant species, they do adapt to different dietary, you know, adaptations. Sorry, different dietary preferences or adaptations. Just like, just take the case of mosquitoes, or just take the case of any animal or plant of any region. Now let's suppose you are living here. Let's take our examples. Okay, so we are basically living in, let's say, most of us are from Odisha. We are living in Odisha and we are acquainted to some food items. Now, because our cultures are very different. Now, let's suppose we'll migrate to, let's say, USA. Now, you may not find the dishes or the food that is available in Odisha. So, what you'll be doing there? You will be adapting to the food that is available in, let's say, America. So, that is basically the nutritional adaptation. Okay, so within nutritional adaptation, we'll try to adapt to that food culture or foods which is available at that you know ecological system. Then resistance to toxins. Now, because a few toxins means what? Anything can be a toxin for any organism. Okay, so you there are few pollutants now, because if my body is not, you know, not adapted to very dusty conditions. Now, if I will be migrating to some places which is basically characterized by dust all around the year, then what will happen is that the body will start adapting to those conditions. So different, mongoose, snakes, pigs, they do have that capacity. They do have, no, they do resist to the toxins. So that is why they adapt to that condition. Then social adaptation is very easy. Socio-cultural adaptation, I mean, if you are living here and you migrate to some other places permanently, so you may not be following the social or the cultural norms that you are following here in Odisha. You may be let's say you migrate to USA and you will be settling there for throughout your life. Then you will have to follow their culture. You will have to learn about their culture. So in a way, what will happen? You are adapting to that human environment. So that is basically the social adaptation. Okay, so biodiversity, all of you will be knowing about biodiversity. Everything is basically considered to be the biodiversity. Bio means life, basically. Okay. Diversity means all the diverse communities that is available. That is basically your biodiversity. And what are the different factors which are affecting the distribution of organisms? Definitely, there will be physical factors. What are the physical factors? So, physical factors you will be having um, soil, climate, availability of water, then the radiation, then all these kind of elements, or these all these parameters are basically uh, determining the kind of organisms that you will be seeing in that region, or the distribution of organisms in that region. Now, just like, and if we will be considering human as an organism, then we'll have to look into what are the different factors which are influencing the distribution of population over the globe. Now, because we are basically abided by uh, those factors. Now, because if there will be no water availability, then we may not prefer to live there. So that means one organism will not be interested in living there. So there are different factors, and different organisms do have different, the toleration power. So they can tolerate, they can adapt to certain climatic conditions. Just like I have given examples of xerophytes. Now, xerophytes, you will be seeing those kind of plants in the desertic region. Now, you may not be seeing a very dense vegetation cover in the desert regions, but still you find xerophytes. Now, because they have adapted to that climatic conditions or that environment. Now, because thus they can take nutrition, or they can take nutrients from the soil, available soil in that region. Okay, so first of all, topography or physiography, that is also affecting the distribution of organisms. Then climate, now because a few of the organisms, they can tolerate extreme climatic conditions. Just like in polar regions, you will be seeing some sort of organisms. Then you may see in different types of organisms in the equatorial and tropical regions. The temperate and subtropical regions do have different types of organisms. And for human habitation, the temperate and subtropical regions are well suited, because the climate is very moderate, and it do provide a better places to live in. Okay, so these are basically the physical factors. So soil, those can be considered as the adaptive factors, topography or physiography. Then you do have climate. So all these are basically physical factors which are influencing the distribution of organisms. The even the plant species. You can think about the plant species now, because the equatorial rainforests, those are basically the evergreen forests. So equatorial rainforests do have a different plant species than that of the temperate forest. The coniferous forests are different from that of the tropical deciduous forest. So based on the climatic condition, based on the regional environment, they have already been adapted to that regional condition or regional environment. Then human factors, as you know that all the biomes are getting exploited by the human beings. Now think about the equatorial rainforests. Now the Amazon rainforests are getting exploited day by day. Then the tropical deciduous forests are also greatly exploited. No, in recent times, but no, in the contemporary times, you will be seeing the rainforests will be exploited much more, and the deciduous forests. But if you'll be thinking about the grassland ecosystems or grassland biomes, the grassland biomes are the ones which are greatly exploited by the human beings, the human civilization. So throughout the human civilization, if we'll be understanding about the resource exploitation, then basically mostly from the deciduous forests and from the grassland ecosystems and grassland biomes, the exploitation is higher as compared to other regions. And let's say urbanization is growing. There are urban sprawl activities. So what will happen then? Industrialization will occur. If the industrialization will grow, then what will happen? Definitely, it will be influencing the ecosystem. It will be influencing the distribution of organisms. Now, if within urban ecosystem or within urbanization, let's say take the case of Bhubaneswar, take the case of let's say Mumbai, Delhi, or Kolkata. So all these mega cities, you will not be seeing a large species community of animal or of plant. That doesn't really matter. But you may not be seeing a lot of species community. So human beings are actually also influencing the distribution of organisms over the globe, and the urbanization and industrialization is playing a great role here. Okay. Okay, so what are the different biogeographical regions of India? uh, these are pretty easy, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, then coastal region, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, you do have somewhere around 37 islands there, and Port Blair is the capital, and those are of volcanic origin. No, those islands are made up of volcanic materials. Then coastal regions, you have stretches of east coastal plain and the west coastal plains. So just like the Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats, these are running parallel to the Western Ghats and Eastern Ghats. Now, because the Western coastal plain is running parallel to the Western Ghat region, so that is how the western part of the Western Ghat basically receives high amount of orographic rainfall, and intense leaching takes place also in those regions. Okay. And so that is why you will be seeing, the western margin, western coastal plains will be characterized by laterite soils, and eastern coastal plains, you must be knowing about different divisions. Okay, coastal plains are divided. The western coastal plains, you do have the Coromandel coast, the Konkan coast, then Mumbai coast, and the Kutch. Okay, so these are basically the divisions of the coastal western coastal plains. And in the eastern coastal plains, first you do have the sorry, Coromandel is basically the eastern coastal plain, the part of eastern coastal plain. Then you have northern Sirkar. So these are divisions of the eastern coastal plain and the western coastal plains. Then Western Ghat, basically tropical evergreen forests are found in Western Ghat. Why? Now, because it receives ample amount of rainfall, mostly during the monsoon season, and because of it, because it is being characterized by a high amount of precipitation, mostly during the monsoon period, and it is not, you know, not disturbed uh, as compared to other parts of these kind of regions. So
Sir,
that
এটা
is
ମାନେ
why we
ୱିଣ୍ଡ
still
ସାର୍ ଏଇଟା ୱିଣ୍ଡୱାର୍ଡ ଆଉ ଲିୱାର୍ଡ ମାନେ ୱେଷ୍ଟର୍ଣ୍ଣ ଘାଟଟା।
ମାନେ କିଛି ବି ଟୋପୋଗ୍ରାଫି ରହିଲେ ୱିଣ୍ଡୱାର୍ଡ ସାଇଡ୍ ଆଉ ଲିୱାର୍ଡ ସାଇଡ୍, ଯୋଉଟା କି ରେନ୍ ସ୍ୟାଡୋ ରିଜନ ବି କୁହାଯାଉଛି ଲିୱାର୍ଡ ସାଇଡ୍। ତ ଯଦି
ୟେସ୍ ସାର୍।
ଟୋପୋଗ୍ରାଫି ରହୁଛି ତାହେଲେ କିଛି ବି ଅବଷ୍ଟ୍ରକ୍ସନ ହେଲେ କଣ ହଉଛି କି, ଯେତେବେଳେ ବି ଯୋଉ ମଏଶ୍ଚର ଲାଡେନ୍ ୱିଣ୍ଡସ୍ ଆସୁଛି, ଯେମିତି କି ମନସୁନ ଟାଇମ ରେ ଆମର ଆରବିଆନ ସି ଆଉ ଇଣ୍ଡିଆନ ଓସନ ରୁ ଯୋଉ ୱିଣ୍ଡସ୍ ଆସୁଛି, ତ ସେଇଟା ଟୋପୋଗ୍ରାଫି ବିକଜ ଅଫ ଦ୍ୟାଟ ଅବଷ୍ଟ୍ରକ୍ସନ, ତ ସେଇଠି ବେସିକାଲି କଣ୍ଡେନସେସନ ହେଇକି ୱିଣ୍ଡ ୱାର୍ଡ ସାଇଡ ରେ ବେସିକାଲି ବର୍ଷା ହଉଛି। ତ ରେନ୍ ଫେଡ୍ ବା ରେନ୍ ସ୍ୟାଡୋ ରିଜନ ରେ ବେସିକାଲି ଡ୍ରାଏ ୱିଣ୍ଡ ଯାଏ, ଯୋଉପଟେ ବେସିକାଲି ବର୍ଷା ହୁଏନି।
ୟେସ୍ ସାର୍।
Okay, so Western Ghat is basically a range of mountain. So range of mountain that is running parallel to your Western coastal plain. Then still you do have Eastern Ghats also. Eastern Ghats in Now all the mountain ranges here in Odisha also are basically part of Eastern Ghat. If you'll be looking into the Odisha geography, you'll be seeing different parts, just like the Similipal and Meghashani region is having a mountain range. Then you do have the Gandhamardan and Mankad Nocha, Molayagiri region is another mountain range, and the interfluves of Mahanadi, um, then Boitarani and Brahmani. So and the last, the Patangi Chandragiri region also in the south, southwestern part of Odisha, that is basically having continuous mountain ranges. So that is why most of the peaks are found in those regions of Odisha. Now, because those are not influenced by any kind of erosional activity. Now, because the middle part is characterized by rivers like the mighty Mahanadi. So that is why we do have valleys nearby the middle region of Odisha, and most of the mountain ranges are very low lying. The height of the peaks are very low also. Okay, and always remember that the Western Ghat region, the mountain ranges of the Western Ghat is very continuous in nature. Why? Now, because no rivers are flowing towards the Arabian Sea. Very few rivers are flowing to the Arabian Sea, and mostly they are originating from the the Western Ghat only, and only Narmada and Tapti. So only few rivers they do flow to the Arabian Sea. Why? Because they are flowing on a Rift Valley. Rift Valley concept. If you know Rift Valley concept, that is basically a faulting concept. Okay. Then Northeast region is basically characterized by some Himalayan mountains and part of Peninsula region also. Okay. And Trans-Himalayan region, all the parts of Jammu, Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, then you do have Uttarakhand and parts of Sikkim and some parts of West Bengal, you can say, but mostly the Sikkim region. So those are basically the Trans-Himalayan region. Himalayan regions, Himalayan regions, Trans-Himalayan. Do you understand the Trans-Himalayan and Himalayan region? The Trans-Himalayan region is basically the upper part. Then you do have Himalayan region. You can have different divisions of Himalayas. Okay, so first one is your longitudinal division. Okay, so longitudinal divisions, you have three longitudinal divisions of Himalayas. You do have what? The upper, middle, and lower Himalayas. Lower Himalayas is basically the Sivalik. Indian desert. Indian desert is basically your third desert of Rajasthan, and few of the species like wolf, caracal, desert cat. So these are basically few species found in Indian desert. Then a Gangetic plain, all the parts of the Punjab, Haryana, then Bihar, Jharkhand, and the West Bengal. So all the Gangetic plains. These are basically the Gangetic plains. Then semi-arid regions. Semi-arid regions are the zone basically stretches between the third desert and the dense forest of the Western Ghat. Deccan Plateau. So you know about the Deccan Trough. Deccan Trough is basically the peninsular India, mostly laying towards the south. Okay, so you know about the Vindhyan and Satpura range in the middle. Uh, and between that only the Narmada River is flowing towards the Arabian Sea, and towards the south of the Vindhyan range, you'll be seeing the Deccan Plateau region. Now, this is basically a volcanic activity. Sorry, volcanic origin region, and that is why black soil is predominantly found in this region. Okay, and some of the biodiversity hotspots has been given here. Biodiversity hotspots are basically those regions which are very rich in flora and fauna communities. So in India, you'll be seeing the Eastern Himalayan region. Those Eastern Himalayan regions are actually very rich in flora and fauna communities. And one hotspot is basically in Western Ghat region. Now, because Western Ghat region do have very rich flora and fauna communities. You may go through this. Okay. Biodiversity in India, no, the biodiversity is basically divided into agrobiodiversity, plural biodiversity, and faunal biodiversity. Agrobiodiversity is basically the agricultural diversity of India. Now, because some parts of India are very dependent upon the rice, while some parts of India, their staple food is basically wheat or roti. So it depends. So that is why we do have different cropping patterns also. So there is a biodiversity within the agriculture of India. So that is what it has been written here. You can go through it. Now, which regions are basically characterized by which crops, and what is their staple food? Then floral biodiversity. I mean, what are the different types of vegetation communities which are found in different parts of India? Now, because there will be regional variation. Now, because the Western Ghats do have tropical evergreen forests, and those regions are characterized by different types of vegetation communities. Now, while the Himalayan region will be characterized by different types of other types of vegetation community. Now, because the alpine forests are mostly seen in the Himalayan region, and always remember the Vindhyan Satpura range also do have different types of vegetation communities, and the dry and moist deciduous forests of the Western Ghat and the Eastern Ghat also do have different types of vegetation community. Okay, so this is it for today. We'll be discussing the other block maybe tomorrow.